Imagine knowing exactly what your students are learning and exactly which steps you need to take next.
Join us in Down with the Reading Quiz to craft meaningful and productive formative assessments that move away from gotcha moments of basic recall and toward assessing what your students actually can do.
In this 30-minute free masterclass, we'll share 3 powerful assessment keys that work for any novel at any time of the year.
Head to shop.bravenewteaching.com/masterclass to sign up, and we'll also send you a free workbook to keep track of all your notes.
Once again, that's shop.bravenewteaching.com/masterclass to nail formative assessments forever. Well, hello and welcome back to Brave New Teaching. I am so happy that you are here today, and I actually am impressed. If you are listening to this podcast and school is over for you, you are truly a dedicated soul. And you know what? Marie and I have said this before. We are definitely on your wavelength. I think that there's something really, really powerful about taking a full break, a full stop, like really getting out of school mode. But at the same time, I think my personality always leaned toward I need to do like a minimal amount of productive school things over the summer to just kind of like keep my brain intact. Because if I check out, I mean, there's no going back. It's all the way out. So I think podcasts and even like following some new people on YouTube, that kind of energy of like filling your cup with ideas and just maintaining connections to your community, that I think is a very healthy way to spend your summer. And if you're not here and you're listening to this at a totally different time and you are checking out, then more power to you. I think you just need to know yourself. So what are we doing here today? We are here for another incredible interview. You have all been requesting these. You've been asking for more teacher-centered interviews, teachers who are going through curriculum rehab, teachers who are using the things that we talk about in this podcast so that you can get a better sense of what they look like in practice with educators across our global community. And so today we're talking to someone incredibly special and near and dear to our hearts, Miss Maegan Baker. And you all probably know Maegan because she's probably answered a few emails for you. You've gotten emails from her. She is not only a full-time middle school teacher, but she's also one of our executive assistants. She is the executive assistant that we have on our team. And she works for us several hours a month. And we are incredibly grateful to her for keeping us together. She gives us such great ideas for the podcast and the business. And it's just been a delight to have a teacher on our staff at the podcast. It just makes us so happy. And we are so looking forward to the day when we can hire more teachers to work with us and do things that bring them joy and help them feel creative and use their talents in a totally different way than how they're used to using them in the classroom. So I sat down with Maegan a while ago, and we sat down because she said to me one day, she said, you know what? I really hate teaching The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. It's brutal. She said, Amanda, I feel the way I do about Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, the way that you've talked about, the way you feel about To Kill a Mockingbird. Like before teaching it, like maybe it was fine. Like it was a fine book. It was a fine story. There's nothing like inherently like atrocious about Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe. But teaching it has been awful for her. And it's a mandated text in her district. So Maegan said that she kind of went through the curriculum rehab process. She realigned the unit so that it was EQ centered first. And it was really that shift of moving away from a text centered unit to a question-centered unit that made the whole difference for her in her experience. And so Maegan is going to tell you all how that went for her, like how she approached moving her units from what they kind of used to be to what they are now, using the methods that we teach in curriculum rehab. And I think you're really going to get some practical, helpful insight into this process for yourself, especially if you joined us for Curriculum Rehab this summer. We're going to be doing some coaching and all kinds of things to help those of you who are in the summer rotation to revamp some curriculum. I really think that Megan's walkthrough is going to help you. So without further ado, I want to share Megan's brilliance with you all. Thank you for being here and enjoy the conversation. You're listening to Brave New Teaching, and we are so much more than a podcast.
We give teachers the inspiration, support, and tools to challenge the status quo.
I'm Amanda, and I'm a former English teacher from Illinois.
And I'm Marie, and I'm a teacher from Southern California.
Join us at bravenewteaching.com to find out more about our courses, festivals, and get every episode's show notes.
We're so glad you're here. Enjoy the show.
We have Maegan Baker on the podcast with us today. Megan, say hi to everyone at BNT.
Hello, BNT.
Megan, what's your deal? What are you doing here?
I am here today to talk about EQs and The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
The Lion, the Witch, and the Stupid Wardrobe. Okay, so Megan, you heard of the intro. Megan works with us very closely on a lot of things. And Megan messaged me not too long ago. And your message, Megan, was something like, I've always hated teaching this book, but I finally figured out how to curriculum rehab it into a way that it's enjoyable. So before we kind of get it, that was a pretty epic teaser, I think I just set up for everyone. So tell us more about your teaching background and like all of that, and then we'll get into the worst book turned into the greatest book ever.
So this is my 14th year teaching. I started teaching in 2009 when there was like this teaching shortage, and I was just applying for everything. And I ended up in the English as a second language, which is what it was called then, multilingual now. But I started in that world and was there for 10 years and ended up being able to teach from K-12, which was always a lot of fun because I would go from like phonics to Red Badge of Courage in like an hour, which is a whole whiplash moment. But going through the whole ML world, you learn so many incredible strategies. And as an itinerant teacher, going into classrooms and telling teachers, like, you could do this. And they would just be like, yeah, when? And it got to the point where I was like, I just want to be able to own my own space. And, watching even you guys with like Marie and her classroom makeovers and, all the things that you guys would be talking about. I was like, I want to do this. Like, I want my own students in my own room. And so after 10 years, I went into the classroom and everybody thought I was crazy because I could never go to the bathroom when I wanted to anymore. But
you are a little bit, that's true.
Yeah. But I've loved it. It's wonderful. I get to do all the things that I want and be creative and help the kids be creative. And I just love teaching. Middle school was not exactly what I thought I wanted to do. I 1,000% thought I'd be in high school because I taught the 9-12 ML class for a couple years. And I was like, yeah, I'll go to high school. But I just ended up in middle school because of friends and an administrator that I loved. And there I was. And here I've been. So now I teach 7th grade all the way in Washington as opposed to Florida where I started. And I love it. It's great.
She's a cross-country middle school ELA workhorse. You, Megan, have earned every accolade that you have. I mean, you are seriously the most hardworking person I've ever met. And I just am so impressed by you. And I am honestly like, this interview is so overdue. We've been talking for a long time before you even started working with us. And I am just impressed mostly by just your willingness to try new things. And that I think that that's something really hard for people, but you embody that. So major shout out to you for that, like way before all the things that we're going to talk about today. Is that scary to you still to try new things or no?
No, I love it. It's always fun because whether it fails or it hits just right, like either way, it was an experience. And I think that's what I try to impart on my students as well. Like, don't be afraid to try things because you walk away with a learning experience regardless.
Well,
And those are important.
it is. I think you're spot on. So, okay, so you're in this situation, which I think a lot of us have found ourselves in, which is there's like a desire to do new things. And then there's like this reality of, but you got to do it with the resources that are available. So you went to the book room, your admin talked to you, like, what was the story about Lion Witch in the Wardrobe?
So in Florida, I taught 6th grade. And so we always did like a Freak the Mighty around Christmas time because that was just like warm and cozy. And the kids geek out over Freak the Mighty. And it's not a book they typically pick up. So when I come here, the team had always kind of taught The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe around Christmas time. And so last year I was like, okay, let's go. And the more that I got through the book, the more I was just like, this C.S. Lewis, no shame to him. Wonderful human, I'm sure. But to read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe with a group of 7th graders when chapter 7 is on page 69 and it's the beavers for dinner, like...
Only a middle school teacher would have that issue. Okay.
And then in my head, I'm like, oh, let's do like a comparison of different films because, you know, you have the British broadcast and then you've also got the older version and then you've got the Disney version. And so we did a whole thing with that. And all my students can focus on is, what is this URL link that you're making us watch, Miss Baker? And I look and it says very large across the top of my screen, the BBC. So it's just like, oh, I love The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I was not prepared. So this year, I decided to be a little bit more intentful, like focused. Intentful? That's a word.
Intentional, I think is the word. But don't ask me.
I just teach English. It's fine. And so I embraced the why do relationships matter? Because I did that last year. But I was like, you know what? Instead of trying to mix all of the things, which I am very guilty of, in that whole like, hey, Maegan likes to try new things. Sometimes I do too many.
It's shiny object syndrome. Yep.
Yeah.
We know it well. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. So I really honed in on 2 standards, which is using vocabulary to kind of explain what's going on in the story. So expanding their vocabulary as well as analyzing how the pieces and parts go together. And I was like, why do relationships matter? Well, if I'm analyzing how things are interacting together, that's a huge piece. So why do relationships matter? So if you are looking at a vocabulary word and I gave them, you know, just random lists and I would have them go through like treacherous, you know, which character is treacherous? How does that impact that relationship? And why does it matter to the story? And so we were constantly diving deeper into everything because it wasn't just like, well, who is treacherous? Great job. Just staying right there on the surface, which is where I feel like a lot of students are so comfortable staying and they feel so proud of themselves when they're like, oh, I know who's treacherous. But having that driving question throughout, why do relationships matter? What is the relationship? Why is it important? And they just got to deeper points in the story that prior we didn't get there. And by embedding that vocabulary in there, I was hearing the word treacherous more and more. So they weren't like, he betrayed them, which was also a great word, but having treacherous kind of enter in and seeing how that formed that relationship. And they were like, well, if he weren't treacherous, then we wouldn't have a conflict.
Aha.
I just love you guys so much. So it was wonderful. It was a great moment.
So, okay, I'm going to kind of do the zoom out for some people, especially people who are new to the podcast or new to this way of thinking. So I think that I say it like college was yesterday. College was like a long time ago.
It was yesterday. What are you talking about?
It was, okay. When we all went to undergrad, I feel like I don't feel like things are changing very quickly in the undergrad education world. So I guess I'm just going to go ahead and pretend like everything's still the same because it probably is. But I feel like when you go through a program and you go into your classroom, so many of these things are translated to us to teach in isolation from one another, right? There, you teach the book, you teach the vocabulary list, you teach the skills. And like, it's assumed that they go together. But there was always for me, and I know for you, because that's what you're saying, there's always that missing piece to bring like true synthesis and like for it to actually come from kids. And I think that that's what I'm hearing you talk about is when this unit was taught the first time, it was kind of feeling like things were a little bit separated. But then when you use that essential question as whatever metaphor you want, right? The spine, the umbrella, the overarching connector, all of a sudden, yeah, maybe you're reading the book on its own, you're doing the vocabulary list, but now the book and the vocabulary speak to each other about relationships. And there's a mission for the book and the characterization and the vocabulary. There's a reason for them to work together. And the reason we need them to work together is to address the bigger question, which is why do relationships matter? And I think I'm also hearing you say this it changes the experience for kids.
Yeah.
So how did you see that? How did you see that unfold?
Even the kids who had read the book, because that was the other issue when I first read it, is a lot of kids read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe with their families, here at least, or like a teacher had picked it up as a read aloud. And so they've heard, and all of them had seen the movie. So all of them are talking from this point of like, I already know the story. So it gets to a point where I don't even have to necessarily focus so much on the reading and, did you do your homework last night? It becomes okay, let's just have this conversation. So even the kid who didn't read it because they were wrestling or they were doing whatever, we're still meeting the standard of how do these elements interact. And, so many of them are like, oh, I'm cheating because like I'm getting the information from my neighbor. It's like, joke's on you, because you're still using your brain to come up with some ideas. And it was actually one of the moments when I was putting this unit together, you were talking about literary Polaroids. And I was like, genius, because how do we go from the work that we're doing to a one-pager? Because there's so much that's involved in a one-pager that going through the book, how do I anchor what they're remembering and learning and discussing before they do the one-pager? Because oftentimes they would feel kind of bamboozled in this like, wait, what did I say 3 weeks ago? And so I had them all throughout. I gave them a chart that had 16 little Polaroid pictures on it. And then when they looked at it, they were really nervous. And I said, the last 4, those are extra credit. You don't even have to do those. So now they're like, oh, yes, we only have to do 12. And then I did the first one for them. So they're like, only 11. Yes. And so we would discuss them. And so then I would give them some time to kind of draw out their little Polaroid. And they get really mad at me because I'm big on like 6 or 7 word sentences. If you can't say it in 6 or 7 words, then you don't know what you're talking about. And they get really angry at me. But what they write is just so pointed and direct that when they went to go do the one-pager, they already knew what they were talking about. And they were able to be prepared and put together these wonderful pieces of art and language together. It was really a proud moment.
I bet you were a proud mama. That's amazing. Okay, Megan, I want to hear more. Well, I think the people want to hear more about like the construction of the unit. What were you using any Sesame Street quizzes? Were you using close reading? Like what were some of the really successful parts of this kind of EQ driven unit? And like piggybacking off that, where did the EQ come up the most, in those types of lessons?
Yeah. So the EQ was the driving factor. It was the bus. It was what we were going through the whole way. So I kind of took the idea of the Sesame Street quiz and modified it ever so slightly. So they had a list of words from a chapter range. So I did 3 chapters, and they would look at their list and they would choose 3 words. And in each of the sentence that they wrote, they would write one sentence using 1 word. I was like, bonus points if you can combine words. And they would explain why did the relationship matter in that chapter set using some of the words. So, for example, like with treacherous, yes, Edmund was treacherous. That is a great point. Way to go. Gold star. but why does that relationship matter?
So what?
Right. Why is Edmund's treachery matter to the story? And they're like, oh, well, it builds conflict. So their sentences were Edmund's treachery against his siblings increase the conflict, which increases the interest in the story. And I was like, okay. Yes. And then I'm like, okay, well, why does that matter? And they're like, because, it creates this dissonance between the sibling group, and they have to overcome this in order to get to where they're going. Like, yes. And all of this is led by them, right? Their discussions. So, their parenting, they do like a pair share, like a structured student talk, like who's treacherous, and they progress through this whole thought process. And then they get to that point where I give them a piece of paper and I say, write your 3 sentences. Sum up what happened in those chapters. Why did those relationships matter? And you need to use at least one word of your list in each of your sentences. So
that's amazing.
It became really simple snapshots, but they're sitting there for like 20, 25 minutes trying to write their 3 sentences. I'm like, why did it take me so long to write 3 sentences? Because they're hard sentences.
Well, they're doing all that cognitive work behind the scenes. I mean, you hit it. I mean, that's what we love about synthesis types of assessments is the quality of the sentences might be lacking and even the clarity might be lacking, but you can see how they're putting pieces together. And I love that this version of Sesame Street still honors the idea that you get what you get, right? Like you can talk about what you do know versus being punished for what you haven't done or you don't understand. And kids can really thrive in that environment. And I'm sure that their trust in you for assessing them that way only made the unit go even better each week.
Absolutely. Because even the kid who wrote the sentence, Edmund is treacherous, right? He's still, or she, or whoever is still entering that standard. And you can very easily sort them into doing really well, ready for enrichment, hitting the standard, but, still needs a little bit of support. And then these are the kids that I need to really intervene with so that we can build some better scaffolds to get deeper into and feel safer within their mindset. So it works out really well.
Well, and that student is part of the conversation. I feel like Marie and I talked about this before, but I don't know if I've really gone on a rant about it, but I can remember, Maegan, honest to God, I can remember multiple years of teaching getting sucked into the vortex of being upset with kids for not doing the expected reading, right? So like the student who wrote Edmund is treacherous maybe didn't do all of the reading, but the conversation that you have around that assessment is about moving forward and going deeper. Whereas like, I remember like my reaction to whatever kind of BS quizzes I was giving before was, I'm so disappointed in all of you. You didn't read. And how are we supposed to do X, Y, and Z? And like I remember getting so upset every time reading was due because I knew that the kids wouldn't have done it. Mm-hmm. And then I get sucked into like going backwards to plot stuff and reteaching stuff. And then we never got to the depth. So I'm so excited to hear you talk about that because I can just hear the vibe of your classroom. I can hear your classroom vibing is what it's a verb now. It's like, honestly, the energy that I can hear from you, like I hear that like transcending into your classroom in a really positive way. Did you feel that energy in your class?
Yeah, even the kids, because in 7th grade, you've still got students that are still overcoming things like dyslexia and learning disabilities and finding their strengths within those fields. Because, those are things that are lifelong struggles that these kids will go through. And we're shifting from that whole word learning in elementary, so these kids are kind of stuck in this middle zone of where reading is still very much challenging and requires a lot of them. So I work really hard to make it both visual, auditory. I provide them, with a bunch of resources, and then getting past that point of standing in front of a class, being that sage on the stage and telling them like, we've gone over this. Why are you failing this test when I've given you pretty much all the answers? Yes, but it didn't mean anything to them. So they're not going to remember that moment because it was meaningless in their world. And even though I gave it my all, And
Yep.
I showed up every day. I need them to take that ownership. And so by releasing a lot of that control and letting them create their own sentences and their own art and their own, awareness within the book, it really helps reinforce those words that they never memorized, right? Like protagonist. I heard somebody the other day talking about, their second grader, and they know that they've heard the word forever. But when you say protagonist in a middle and high school, the kids' just minds melt down because they can't possibly remember it.
Yep.
But here they are, like, because you're giving them this open door to walk through and explore, they do start pulling those words more. And that's what I want to see. That's what I want to have for them.
It's amazing because I think what you are describing right now is comforting to people who are thinking like, okay, inquiry-based teaching feels like when you use the word like open door, I think that makes some people's hearts like have palpitations because, right, releasing control over certain things feels like a free-for-all in like the early concepts of that stage. And I think, but what you just described though is you're not really releasing much. You're reformatting, right? And like the perception of students is that they have more freedom, but you have set up very clear, very strong guideposts, right? Like these kids, you did not just like throw them into deep water. They're in a pool with lane lines, right? And life jackets. Like everything that they need is there, but they're not directionless. They're free, but not wandering. And I think you've done a nice job. So, okay. So speaking of those posts, so you had your essential question, you had your quizzes were awesome. Your 1-pager final assessment was awesome. What were some of the other like signature moments from your unit? Like did you have a gateway or like other awesome unit moments that you can recall?
Yes. Let me remember what we did for our gateway.
I know brains are melting these days.
We used picture books. And I read them. Thank you. I read them. Thank you, Mr. Falker.
Oh yeah.
His name always gets stuck in my mouth. But I read the picture book to them and we talked about why did that relationship matter. And that the book is a little lengthy for middle school students to sit through the whole thing, but some of them had heard it before. And as we're talking, we're discussing the fact that, this teacher was impactful and the student was impactful to the teacher. And I said, well, do you guys ever have moments with, in your day-to-day life where you feel like a teacher really impacts your life? And the kids were like, well, yeah. I said, yeah, me too. Like, my kindergarten teacher, I can still see that moment when we all as a class pronounced the word dog that she had written on the board. And she was just so excited. And I was like, those moments, why do they matter? And so the kids just descend into their chaos of conversations. And it's all about how it impacts their life and how it changes stories in their heads about themselves or some experience. And it was just so wonderful. And so it really set the stage of, what is the relationship and why does it matter? These two questions that we continue to ask throughout the whole story. And, they started with this connection to self, and then they started branching outward. And like you were saying with the lanes, like they were swimming kind of doggy paddle in the beginning in their lane. And as we went through, because we keep asking the same two questions, but the content gets more developed and more diverse in their brains, the responses that I get from them are better quality. So by the time it comes for them to do their final assessment, they have so many ideas in their brain. And so I said, hey, look at what you've got for your 1-pager. I want you to choose the 4 most important relationships in the whole book. And I gave them the example of Aslan knighting Peter. And I said, why does that relationship matter? And they're like, well, if he didn't get knighted, then he's just a boy who fell out of a closet and becomes the king of a country. And they're like, that doesn't make any sense. So I was like, so what is that helping? And they're like, plot. That helps us with the plot. We'd have a hole in that plot if we didn't have that moment. Wow. And so they draw the little Peter knighting, or Aslan knighting Peter. And I said, okay, well, you have to explain your drawings, because if I just look at your drawing, it might look that Aslan's about to decapitate Peter.
Truth.
And so they all did the exact same thing. I have the whole class descending into chaos of laughter,
Yes.
which I love. And so they're telling me in their own words, why this relationship was important to the story and how it showed that Peter earned the trust and respect of Aslan and therefore the country and set him up to become the king. They're like, can I use that in my response, in my paragraph? I was like, yes, go for it. And I even wrote my notes. And so they're like, so we can use that. And I was like, yeah, because you have to describe your other 3. So if my 1 is going to help you feel comfortable, because honestly, the kids who really struggle with writing, they're still having to interpret and take in and then produce on their own, because mine are just bullet point notes. So even the student with this extensive IEP and all of the things, that person is now supported to at least get 1 sentence or 1 thought completed. And it gives me that ability to be like, hey, look, when given supports, they can do this 1 time. And then my higher achieving students, because I have students that are in the gifted or the high cap program, we call it high cap here, but those students are able to really flex those literary muscles and dive into those deeper relationships and richer language. So I just love it.
That's amazing. Okay, to round out like all of the kind of the phases of this unit, one thing we talk about a lot on the podcast, and I talk about a lot with my EQ packs, is like looking at supplementals. Did you use any supplementals that were like really powerful for this particular novel? Because I don't know, I've never taught Language in the Wardrobe, so I'm wondering like what supplementals maybe were really helpful if anyone else is going to teach this novel.
Yes. Okay. So we have bell ringers. We start with independent reading and then I give them a bell ringer. And each day they focus on a different piece. And so 1 week we'll do fiction, then we'll do nonfiction, and then we'll do fiction, right? Back and forth. So we did this in 3 weeks. So we used The War That Saved My Life for the first week, because in the beginning it talks about the kids being sent to the country in England, which is how The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe also starts. So the kids were like, these kids get sent to the country too? And I was like, yes, because that's what happened. And they're like, oh, wow. And we talk about dialogue and how dialogue is used. And in the little excerpt that I gave them, there's like a mom, a brother, a sister, and then the brother talks about some other character that's, how he learns about people being sent to the countryside. And so I'm like, which characters are important in the scene? And so you've got the really go-getter kids who are like 5 or 4, right? And I'm like, yes, but who is important? And then you've got the other, and so they start to really hone in on who is there and what's going on and why they matter. And so we had just finished talking about characterization. So I'm still kind of using, like pulling steel occasionally just to keep it in their brains. I'm like, talk to me about this character. And they're like, she's abusive because the mom is abusive in the story. And so each week we would use different things. For the nonfiction, I use the National Geographic classifications of relationships.
Yep.
And all the kids immediately, why are we doing science in English? And I said, because science still uses words. And so we talked about what type of relationships we saw within the book. So is there a mutualistic relationship? Is there and so the kids were like, it's competition all the way because Edmund is trying to I was like, see, so you can use science in language arts too.
Yes.
And so that
article is amazing. That is a winner every time with the EQ for sure.
Absolutely. Because it gives them a new perspective to look at it. And my kids had already just done symbiosis within their science class. So they were just so excited they weren't excited. I'm not gonna put that.
No, but it comes on the back. It came on the back end. They were like, oh.
They were appreciative that they already knew the words, even though they were resentful for having to use them again.
Because their words have never been spoken, Maegan Baker.
They're 7th graders. They are still 7th graders at heart. The high schoolers would have been just as big a punks. Yeah. Yeah, they're wonderful. I felt the emotion deep down.
Okay, so you had a fiction, a nonfiction, then you went back to fiction again?
Yes. And so then we did I Must Betray You.
Mr.
Yes.
Petty's.
And that was just fabulous. The kids, I had a fight over who got the book. And
Awesome.
I think in the course of because I had mentioned a couple books at the beginning because we had gone to the library. So I was like, hey, if you're really into this, you like historical fiction, like here's a couple books that you can try to get from the library. And I had one girl come up and she's like, I just finished my book and I need a new book. And I was like, here you go. I Must Betray You. You're going to love it. And her mom messaged me and she was like, my daughter is sitting in her room crying. What did you do? And I was like, trust the process. Trust the process. She's like, she read the book in 5 days. I was like, we all did. Yes. Yeah. None of us set it down. But we talked about figurative language and how figurative language helped us understand the relationships more, and how when they talk about the securitate, in that she doesn't ever describe or actually tell you what the securitate is. You had to use so many context clues to kind of build that meaning. And so we looked at context clues in there, and it's just this quick 5-minute discussion, and they get to read different excerpts from different texts. So that worked out really well.
I'm having flashbacks of I Must Betray You right now. And like, this is what, okay, no one really, I mean, maybe you all are here for this, but like, this is why EQs are so amazing. Like, because you brought up the why to relate. When I read I Must Betray You, I read it, right? I wasn't teaching it. I didn't have an EQ in mind, but thinking about it now about relationships and thinking about language in the wardrobe, everything about I Must Betray You has to do with treachery, betrayal of family members against one another because of the society that they live in. You could do a paired unit of just those two that would maybe even be more lights out than what you just did. Oh my gosh. I'm having like a lot of like moment, like the Coke bottle and like all these like, these like symbols of like trust and love that end up being, oh my gosh. Okay.
Yeah.
If you take away nothing from this interview, it's you must go read I Must Betray You. And then Maegan is brilliant. Yes, but
I feel like if they've gotten this far with BNT, like they've already read I Must.
They're in it. I think you just underscored like that. Like you just were in. I was a student for just a second right there, like in your world, right? Like you set up the framework under relationships. You provided the texts that speak very clearly to that topic, theme, all of those things. Like that's what we're talking about with inquiry, right? Is that you have very carefully, very methodically done all the pre-planning and work to make sure that these things fit together. But then the kids have no idea until they start putting the pieces. It's not random. It's not random that they're putting these things together because you have put them there for the kids to figure out. And they figure out how they go together because they're not stranded. You've done all that work for them, and I'm so freaking impressed with you. And how does it feel like to finish that kind of a unit? Like what kind of a teacher vibe do you get finishing a unit like that?
It was a big success, especially knowing how much I hated the book going into it. And it was very much because originally I had the August dreams and September realities. Like yes. I 1,000% wanted a dystopian Christmas. Like we were going to do dystopian book clubs. We were going to still focus on why do relationships matter, but like all the books being read and like all the different things happening. And the reality of it is that I had zero time to plan any of that. And there was too many things going on. And it's like, look, I already have this book. This book is short. I only have 3 weeks. So let's really just embrace what we have, use what we have, and make the most of it. And through a variety of things, I was able to put all of this together. And I mean, and a lot of it was you guys' help and support through that whole curriculum rehab process and the podcast. It was when you said literary Polaroids, I was like, that's it. That's my missing piece. This is what's going to be that constant that develops. Because even when they got to their one pager, they're like, the drawing that I did on my Polaroid, I didn't focus on the right thing in the drawing. I'm like, so make it better on your 1 pager. And they're like, I can do that? Yes, please.
Yeah.
Please don't stick with something that sucks. And also, like, same. Like, I did the same process. I looked at what I already had and I loved what I previously, what I previously did. And so it was really just embracing the resources and tools that I had and going from there. And it snowballed into a magical, like, snowman.
And the magic is definitely like what you've already reiterated so many times is the kids coming to coming into their own conclusions at their own time and saying things that like blow your mind, but they really shouldn't, because you made sure that that was going to happen. And kudos to you, applauso to you, my friend, because even just going through this episode, like this is a lot of work. And I think the teaching world is like, there are no shortcuts. I mean, there are, but the results are usually mediocre at best. And I hope that like going through this once, and I know you've done versions of this before because I know you personally, but like if this was the first time you've done it, don't you feel more empowered to do it again for other units?
Absolutely. The organization and the structure just made it so much easier on me, which made it easier on the kids. And they really were able to practice and hone those skills that they previously would have just like, I feel like tipped a toe into, and then we would move on to something else. And so, I definitely think that sticking with this sort of approach it's going to pay off better in the long run for the students.
I hope so. And I want to hear about your next brainchild when you have it or after you've done it, because it's probably more fun to talk about it in the past tense than in the planning stages, because that can be kind of a chaotic time to there's a lot of podcasts when everyone's like, wow, your brain is real crazy, but this is not helping me.
That might be true. Bless my coworker, because she trusts the process sometimes more than I think she should, but she's wonderful.
Fair enough. Do you have any fun plans coming up for another unit that you can share with us before we sign off today?
Let's see. The rest of the unit is to survive the rest of the school year. That's my unit. I have ideas and I have plans, but like you said, they probably are very scary to get into because there's a lot of, well, maybe I'll do this and maybe I'll do that. I'm also not the teacher who left in December with the plan for when we get back.
Okay, well, you will be after we hang out because I'm going to plan it for you. So
yes,
That's what we do here. This
is how this relationships works, guys.
Maegan, if teachers want to follow you in the socials and like be part of your life a little bit, can you tell people where they can find you?
Yes. So on Instagram, I am not the best person to post things, but I think Miss Baker's Productions is where I am at on Instagram. And I just am more of like a story person, but like I aspire to post more on the things that I do in class, but half of it is Amanda's and Brave New Teaching's work. So that's where I'm at.
Well, Maegan's very hard working for us and making magic happen at Brave New Teaching and at Muddening. So we are so grateful for you. Thank you for coming to share everything with us. And I feel like we could talk for another hour. So we will. We're going to sign off and we're going to keep talking, but everyone else has to get back to the rest of their lives. So thank you, Maegan, for being here. We so appreciate you, and we look forward to your next brilliant unit.
Well, thank you so very much. I'm glad that I got to hang out with you all today.
All right. Bye, Maegan.
Bye.
Thanks again for listening to Brave New Teaching.
We'd love to keep the conversation going over on Instagram.
And while you're there, check out the links in our bio for the most up-to-date events going on in the Brave New Teaching community.
Thanks for being here and have a great week at school.